every homicide investigation, you follow motive, money, timeline, and proximity. And you don't skip steps because it's uncomfortable, and you don't skip steps because the person is sympathetic. You don't skip steps because the public is grieving. So here's the question that no one in power seems willing to answer. Was the spouse, Erika Kirk, investigated and cleared, or was the narrative decided first? Okay, here's why I'm bringing this up. Charlie Kirk is assassinated on September 10th, 2025. 8 days later, his wife, Erika Kirk, becomes the CEO and chair of a massive national political organization. That's not a small promotion. That is a major transfer of power, money, influence, messaging, direction, control. Before he died, she wasn't running the organization. After he died, she was. Now listen carefully, because I'm not saying she pulled the trigger. I'm not saying she committed a crime. What I'm saying is this. When someone experiences a dramatic increase in power and financial authority immediately after a death, that fact alone makes it reasonable to slow down and look carefully, okay? That's not a conspiracy theory, and that's not conspiracy thinking. That's adult thinking. And then you layer in a few more things, like looking at the pattern of behavior after the death, a viral surgeon story about miraculous bone density that appears not to have come directly from the surgeon, a merchandise spike discussed publicly within weeks, a replica of the Prove Me Wrong tent that he was shot and turned into a photo op, digital history quietly reduced, relationship timelines that conflict with archived records, a pre-assassination countdown post on her Instagram to September 16th with no purpose. It makes no sense. A named witness claiming she was at Fort Huachuca the day before the murder, a claim that was never publicly resolved. Allegations involving inappropriate messages with a minor that have not been verified, or they haven't been authenticated either, but they haven't been directly addressed through formal investigation. Why are we not investigating this? And individually, any one of these things could mean nothing, right? But together, they form a pattern that in any other high-profile case would trigger some scrutiny, okay? Because when power shifts overnight, especially political power, the public deserves an explanation, and they deserve transparency. If everything was handled properly, then great, show it. If it wasn't, that matters too. So this video isn't about screaming accusations. It's about walking through motive, timeline, and unresolved questions that deserve answers in a calm, methodical way. And if by the end of this video you think that I'm wrong, fine. But at least you'll understand why I think that we should be paying attention to Miss Erika Kirk in more detail. So let's start at the beginning. So 8 days after Charlie Kirk's assassination, the Turning Point USA board unanimously elected Erika Kirk as the CEO and chairperson of the board. At the time of his death, Charlie's annual salary was estimated at more than $407,000. TPUSA employs about 450 staff members. It manages millions in funding, and it operates on roughly 3,500 campuses nationwide. This isn't a small nonprofit. This is a national political machine with real money, real influence, and real access to power. The justification given by the board was that Charlie had expressed to multiple executives that this is what he wanted in the event of his death. That might be true, but there is no written succession plan here. No will, no documented instruction has been shown publicly to produce to support that claim. In investigative work, there is a basic concept called motive. Motive alone never proves guilt. It doesn't, but investigators are trained to identify who had something to gain because it establishes incentive structure. So let me ask you a very simple question. Who benefited most from Charlie Kirk's death? In 8 days, Erika Kirk went from running a small Christian clothing brand and hosting a podcast to becoming the CEO and chairperson of one of the most powerful conservative organizations in America. $407,000 salary, oversight of 450 people, and influence across thousands of campuses. control over millions in funding, and proximity to national political power. And everything shifted in just over a week. And all the public has been given is a verbal claim from board members who now report to the very person who benefited from that transition, Ms. Erika Kirk. In any serious examination, the next question would simply be, has this been independently verified? Has anyone outside of TPUSA confirmed that a documented succession plan existed prior to Charlie's death? Has that documentation been shown? Because when the power shift is this large and this fast, transparency isn't hostility, it's accountability. And I have not seen that level of independent verification or confirmation ever addressed to any of the things that we're asking. Within 72 hours of Charlie Kirk's death, Erika Kirk appeared publicly and delivered a prepared address. The focus was on the movement continuing, on legacy, on momentum, on what Turning Point USA would do next. The tone was very steady, it was composed, it was mission forward. Now, I want to be careful here because people grieve differently. Some people collapse, some people go quiet, some people go into task mode, especially in high pressure situations and environments. Shock can look very different. I am not here to tell anyone how a widow should behave in the first 3 days after losing her husband. What I am pointing out is the contrast. In many cases, the first 72 hours after a sudden violent death are disorienting. They are raw. They're emotional. In this case, what the public saw was organization, direction, forward movement almost immediately. Now, that doesn't prove anything, but when you pair that level of composure with an 8-day transition into full executive control of a national organization, it becomes part of the pattern. The messaging was not centered on unanswered questions or on personal devastation. It was centered on continuity, on the mission, on carrying forward the structure, money. Again, that may simply reflect personality and shock response, or it may reflect something else entirely. I'm not assigning meaning here. I'm asking you to notice the timing of it, because in high-profile situations, timing tells you as much as words do.
Young men, just like the one who took his life. That young man, on the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him.
11 days after her husband's murder, Erika Kirk stood in front of 70,000 people with pyrotechnics and everything, and President Trump seated behind her and said, "That young man, I forgive him." Then she paused. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation. Then she completed the sentence. I want you to think about that pause, because in public speaking, a pause before applause is not accidental. It is a technique. You deliver the line, you hold, you let the reaction come. It's taught in acting classes. It's also taught in preacher training. It is the oldest crowd manipulation technique in the book. Now, maybe Erika Kirk was so overwhelmed by grief that the pause was genuine. Maybe she lost her breath. Maybe it was the most human moment of her life. But here's what I know. That moment became the single most covered image of the entire memorial. It neutralized every question anyone had about her behavior in the preceding 11 days. It was replayed on every network. Tim Allen publicly announced it inspired him to forgive his own father's killer. One performance, 11 days of behavioral red flags erased. That is either the grace of God working through a grieving widow, or it is what a trained actress does when she needs the audience on her side, before the questions get louder. In August 2025, Bill Ackman hosted a private gathering of conservative influencers in the Hamptons, and Ackman has confirmed that this meeting happened. Around that same period, there are claims circulating reported by the Gray Zone and through a source described as a longtime friend of Charlie Kirk's that Netanyahu reached out and there was a discussion of major pro-Israel funding push tied to TPSA. That part is not independently corroborated, so I'm not presenting it as fact here, but what I am saying is this. It is now part of the public conversation. It involves named parties and has never clearly been addressed in a transparent way by this organization at all, okay? Tucker Carlson has said, based on his own conversations with Charlie, that Charlie had grown frustrated with Netanyahu and felt used. And Charlie himself, on September 9th, publicly questioned whether the media was presenting the truth about Israel while sitting across from Ben Shapiro. Those are public markers of a real internal tension about messaging and about direction. Now fast forward to after Charlie's death, and the organizational posture looks different. The Daily Wire donated $1 million to TPSA in Charlie's name. Ben Shapiro was given a prime opening slot at AmFest right after Erika remarks, and he used the platform to publicly attack Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and Megyn Kelly by name. And there was no public pushback from Erika in that moment. Candace Owens also posted that she received an anonymous tip alleging planned filming involving Erika, Netanyahu, and Shapiro connected to Daystar in Palm Beach that was later canceled. And that claim is unverified and should be treated as such, but again, it's weird. There has been no confirmation or denial from any of the parties for any of these things. This isn't about accusing anyone of anything, especially violence. It's about transparency and influence. When a movement's leader dies and the organization's alignment, gatekeepers, and funding relationships appear to shift dramatically afterward, it becomes reasonable to ask what conversations were happening behind the scenes and what agreements were on the table. If none of it is true, it's easy to debunk with specifics. If some of it is true, it should be addressed with documentation. Either way, silence is fueling the speculation here, and transparency would end it. Strip away the drama. This is a governance and transparency question. Point of fact. So in February, Candace Owens raised questions about the night before Charlie left for Utah, and one key detail didn't come from Owens, it came from Erika herself. So in a public interview, Erika stated that the night before Charlie departed, she and their daughter slept in the couple's bed, while Charlie slept in their daughter's room, explaining that she wanted him to get a good night's rest before his speaking engagement. That detail is on record in her own words. Candace Owens later characterized the arrangement as unusual, and separately questioned reports that Kirk children were pulled from school in the days before the assassination. The school claim hasn't been verified, but again, Erika hasn't publicly provided a detailed timeline addressing any of this. These aren't accusations, they are timeline elements. In any high-profile homicide case, we would be asking and getting this information. Boom, boom, boom. We're asked to reconstruct 24 to 48 hours carefully because these small details matter. And if the sleeping arrangement was simply about comfort, then it would be super easy to clarify, right? If the school schedule was routine, the change in it was routine, it would be easy to document. But when these timeline questions are raised and they go unanswered publicly, then speculation fills the vacuum. Then in December 2025, Erika and Candace met privately for 4.5 hours, and both said the meeting was productive, but Owens didn't retract her concerns. And she publicly stated that she's actually leveled up by now, that her questions were not answered to her satisfaction. Erika's public response was brief. She just said, stop. That's all I have to say. Stop. Stop investigating your husband's murder. Wouldn't you want to know who killed him? And Owens replied, asking what she had lied about. Around the same time, it was reported that multiple TPUSA employees were terminated following the leadership transition, and that remaining staff were questioned about loyalty to the new CEO. Organizational restructuring after sudden leadership change isn't inherently suspicious, but it's weird. When unanswered timeline questions and internal shakeups happen and public demands for silence occur at the same time, it reinforces a larger issue that this entire video has been asking about. Why has so much of this been left without straightforward documentation? None of these details prove wrongdoing, but they do reinforce the need for clarity, and clarity is not an attack, it's protection for everyone involved. By itself, this isn't strange, but when you add it to everything else that we've talked about, it's weird, and it deserves explanation. Roughly 2 weeks after the assassination, Erika held a Zoom call with TPUSA staff. So audio from that call was later reported on by multiple outlets after it was leaked publicly. In the recording, she can be heard saying things like, and describing Charlie's memorial as an event of the century, and discussing merchandise sales connected to the event that reportedly totaled around $200,000. At one point, she says, "Is it weird to say that I'm excited?" And then continues speaking about the momentum and the numbers. Now,
We had thousands that were registered to vote. I think we're at like over 200,000 for merch sales. Don't quote me on that because I think it just keeps like bumping up like crazy. But I just wanted to say a huge, huge, huge thank you to that we were able to pull off an event of a century. Like, it's just insane.
you can interpret tone however you want, but those are her words. $200,000 in merchandise tied to a memorial, and an acknowledgement that she was excited about it. It feels strange, right? Followed by continuing anyway. Just hold on to that for a moment. Feel into that. Then fast forward to December 2025, 3 months after the assassination, at TPUSA's AmFest conference, the organization installed a replica of the Prove Me Wrong debate tent, the same type of tent that Charlie was standing in when he was shot. It was set up as a photo op. Selfies. Coverage from multiple outlets documented it. One attendee publicly described it as ghastly and questioned why a replica of the scene connected to his death was being used as a backdrop for selfies. In response to the criticism, Erika said on Instagram, "Their words, their accusations, their assumptions, and their slander don't land, they don't burn. Never will I owe the world nothing." Again, people handle grief differently. Organizations memorialize leaders in different ways. But when merchandise revenue, memorial excitement, and replica installations enter the picture within months of a public assassination, it paints a different picture. I'm not telling you what to conclude here, but I'm asking you to notice the pattern. Because in a high-profile homicide case, public behavior becomes part of how people assess character, judgment, and priorities, and if they're involved. And these moments, whether intentional or not, shaped perception. So here's what I keep coming back to. In any murder investigation, the truth is enough, right? Like, you don't need embellishment. You don't need mythology. You don't need miracle framing. The facts should stand on their own. So why add details that aren't true? Why take a surgeon's name and attach a quote that probably was not a direct quote, doesn't sound anything like what a surgeon would say? Why introduce a man of steel language into something that is already tragic and devastating? People are already grieving. The country was already paying attention. The story did not need to be dramatized. And that's what makes it strange. Because when you're dealing with a homicide, especially one this high profile, accuracy matters. You don't add poetry. You don't build myth. You don't turn it into something cinematic. You stick to the facts. If the bullet behaved a certain way, explain it medically. If it was a frangible, explain the physics. If it wasn't, release the documentation. That's how credibility is preserved. When a narrative shifts from forensic to miraculous, that's going to change how people process what happened. And I'm not accusing anyone of anything here. I am simply asking a very simple question. When the truth is solid, you don't need to, why dress it up? Why add stuff that isn't true? In a December 2025 CBS News town hall, Erika stated on camera that she didn't date while living in New York for 5 years before she met Charlie in 2018. She went further, describing her roommate's dating behavior as strange. That statement exists on video. Now here's the issue. Material preserved by the Wayback Machine and reported on by multiple outlets documents a relationship with J.T. Massey in 2014-2015, where she referred to him publicly as her incredible boyfriend, and even filmed an Amazing Race audition together. In 2017, multiple Instagram posts from friends described her and Cabot Phillips as a gorgeous couple and lovebirds. In 2018, she appeared on Bravo's Summer House as a romantic interest, filmed socializing and drinking, which she said she didn't do. These are documented public records. Everyone has a past. Nobody's asking her to be a saint, okay? But the issue isn't that she dated. The issue is that her public statement doesn't align with documented history. There's a difference between saying I lived differently back then and I've grown, and presenting a version of events that basically erases your past and your relationships entirely. When public statements conflict with archived evidence, the credibility takes a hit. And when credibility takes a hit in one area, people naturally begin to question other areas, okay? That's not a character assassination. That's pattern recognition, and patterns do matter. The pattern matters here. There's also the issue of digital erasing, and this is where pattern becomes harder to ignore. Archived records from the Wayback Machine and verified X accounts have documented a very interesting shift in social media activity around the time of the assassination. Erika had not posted on X under her own account since September of 2023. 2 years of silence with only occasional reposts. Then suddenly she posted 3 consecutive days in a row, September 8th, September 9th, and September 10th, the day of the assassination. And I'm not telling you what that means, but I'm telling you it happened. It's documented. And it has not been publicly explained. In the 5 months that followed, her personal Facebook account was deleted to just 39 posts. So she deleted a significant amount of her prior content, and her personal website was stripped down. Her Twitter content stripped down. Past relationships were scrubbed. But most of this was preserved through digital archives. And I get it, none of this proves that she did anything wrong. People rebrand, people clean up old content, public figures curate their digital footprint. But when you combine a sudden burst of activity immediately before a national tragedy with months of post-event deletion across multiple platforms, it raises a reasonable question about timing. And in cases that carry this much public weight, digital history becomes part of the record, okay? When large portions of that record disappear after the fact, it doesn't automatically imply guilt, but it does reduce the transparency. On September 2nd, 2025, 8 days before Charlie was assassinated, Erika posted a numbered countdown to her verified Instagram account with the caption, "Walk the countdown with us." Okay, 9/16/2025. In the accompanying video, she asked, "What if childhood could hold eternity?" The post was geotagged at Chase Field in Phoenix, which would later become the location of Charlie's September 21st memorial service. The countdown appeared as part of a numbered series, and a later entry in that series showed the number 10 over footage dated September 12th, 2 days after Charlie had already been killed. Then September 16th arrived. That date became significant for an entirely different reason. It was the day Tyler Robinson was formally charged with aggravated murder, and the day that prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty, and the day Charlie's body was transported home to Arizona. Fact checkers quickly moved to debunk a pregnancy rumor that was tied to the countdown, and that rumor was addressed. But the original question was never addressed. What was the countdown for? There was no product launch, there was no event announcement, no reveal tied to September 16th. The date came and went, and whatever the countdown was pointing to was never publicly addressed or explained by Erika or TPUSA. And I'm not telling you what that means, but I'm pointing out that it remains unexplained, and it's weird. And in a case where timing has already raised questions, an unexplained pre-event countdown tied to a date that later became central to the aftermath of a case deserves at least a straightforward answer. So Cabot Phillips is a documented part of this whole story, and that matters because social media reporting shows that Erika was in a relationship with Cabot Phillips in 2017 before she met Charlie. During that same period, Charlie Kirk publicly posted about playing one-on-one basketball with Cabot Phillips, including a September 24th, 2017 post on his Instagram joking, "Yeah, I beat Cabot one-on-one, not sick of winning." Okay, so that establishes proximity. Charlie and Cabot were not strangers. They were interacting publicly. And at the same time, Erika and Cabot were publicly described by friends as a gorgeous couple and lovebirds. And Erika wrote him a birthday message referencing where it all started. Then fast forward to Erika's later public account where she says she first met Charlie in 2018 during a trip to Israel, describing it as a chance encounter, that she had never seen him before that turned into a job interview, and then a date. Here's the problem. If Erika was in a relationship with Cabot in 2017 and Charlie was publicly spending time with Cabot in 2017, the idea that Charlie was a complete stranger to her until a random meeting in Israel in 2018 becomes really difficult to reconcile. It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't mean it's false, but it just doesn't make any sense. And it means the timeline gets to be clarified. So either there was a prior awareness that has not been acknowledged, or the chance encounter narrative has been simplified in a way that leaves out context. So after the assassination, Cabot Phillips was appointed to lead TPUSA's How to Lead Like Charlie campus tour series, effectively stepping into Charlie's speaking role. It's not criminal, no, but it's weird, and it reinforces how interconnected these relationships were. And when public narratives describe events as fate or coincidence, and then the archive timelines show overlapping circles well before that moment, it is reasonable to ask for a clear account of what the hell's going on. Not because the dating history is scandalous, but because consistency matters. This doesn't make sense. And when the timelines don't line up very cleanly, people will notice. And when people notice, the simplest solution is to tell the truth. We're not getting that here. Now, this next part, I'm not saying Erika was at Fort Huachuca. I'm not saying she conspired with anyone. What I am saying is that it's weird. In December 2025, a former Special Forces operative identified as Mitch Snow appeared publicly and made a specific named claim. He stated that on September 9th, the day before Charlie was killed, he was at Fort Huachuca in Arizona, observed unusual military activity, he was detained, and was questioned for hours. And later, after seeing media coverage, he believed that he recognized a woman matching Erika Kirk's description, along with Charlie's head of security at the base that morning. He said he was 95 to 99% certain. That's his claim, and it hasn't been independently confirmed, but Candace Owens later posted what she described as an incident report from Fort Huachuca showing that a suspicious individual was detained at 11:17 a.m. that morning, which she argued aligned with Snow's account of being questioned, right? So in January 2026, Owens stated that additional unnamed witnesses reported similar sightings, including one woman who had posted online shortly after the assassination. At the same time, Cabot Phillips publicly denied being at Fort Huachuca and posted location evidence, placing himself in Nashville. And Owens, and I also would say, that disputed that evidence. That dispute remains unresolved. So, because there was still time for him to do both, okay? No official investigative body has publicly addressed whether Erika Kirk's whereabouts on September 9th were verified. That is the point here. Fort Huachuca is a known military installation with intelligence and technology functions, and Erika's family background includes documented Department of Defense contracting, connections, and national security industry ties, which are matters of public record. Those facts alone don't establish wrongdoing, but they do establish that the location itself would not be random in her world, okay? And it's weird. It's weird. The only responsible conclusion at this stage is that a named witness made a claim, counterclaims were made, and that no official clarification has been issued publicly resolving it. And in a case of this magnitude, if an alibi gap exists in the public record, the cleanest way to put it to rest would be verification. Until that happens, this remains an unanswered question that I'm asking you to pay attention to. Not an accusation, an unanswered question. I want to be honest with you about what this video is. It's not a conviction. I'm not a prosecutor, I'm not a judge, and I'm not telling you that Erika Kirk killed her husband, okay? What I am telling you is that in 5 months, in the highest profile political assassination in a generation, the public has not received answers to questions that are standard in every homicide. Okay? In every investigation in America, they're standard. So let me give you the list. Not my opinions, the documented gaps here. So 1, the spouse was appointed CEO of a $100 million organization 8 days after the murder. The justification was an unwritten, unwitnessed, unverified verbal instruction. In any other estate dispute, in any other corporate succession, that claim would require documentation. It has never been independently corroborated. Has anyone asked for it under oath? 2, the spouse's account of how she met her husband is demonstrably false. We have the social media archives. We have the basketball post. We have the relationship timeline. She was connected to Charlie Kirk's inner circle before the chance encounter. She described on national television. Why does the origin story need to be false? What does the true version contain that she can't say publicly? 3, on June 13, 2019, the year she married Charlie, the year TPUSA's revenue exploded by $20 million, a senior TPUSA official tagged her at an Arizona Israel Public Affairs Committee event welcoming Yair Netanyahu to the state. The same Netanyahu family that offered Charlie's organization billions. The same offer Charlie refused weeks before he was killed. Was that financial network ever examined as part of the investigation? 4. A named witness with military background placed her at a military intelligence facility the morning before the assassination, a facility where her mother's company held active DoD contracts. That claim has a named source, a corroborating incident report, and a documented family connection to that specific base. Has any official publicly stated that this claim was investigated and cleared? 5. 8 days before the assassination, she posted a numbered countdown to September 16th, the date Tyler Robinson was charged, the date Charlie's body came home, geotagged at what will become the memorial venue. That countdown was never explained. The announcement it pointed to was never made. No journalist has asked her publicly, what were you counting down to? Started before Charlie died. 6. The surgeon quote that defined the national narrative of the shooting, the miraculous neck that briefly saved Charlie's life, has never been confirmed by any surgeon, neither have the ballistics. TPUSA's own spokesperson cannot produce the source. That quote shaped how the world understood this case. Who authorized it? Why has no one been held accountable for it? It's weird. This is a surgeon. 7. In a 4.5-hour private meeting, the questions weren't answered. The public response wasn't transparency. It was stop asking. Now, stop. The forgiveness speech, 11 days after her husband's murder, she stood in front of 70,000 people with pyrotechnics and said, I forgive him, and paused for the applause before completing the sentence. Maybe that was genuine grace. Maybe that was a revelation. Maybe that was a woman destroyed by grief, finding her faith in the public. But what I want you to notice, what that moment did, it was curated. It ended the conversation for a moment. It made every subsequent question feel like an attack on a grieving widow who had already demonstrated more Christian character than any of her critics. It was the single most effective thing anyone could have done to close the door on public scrutiny. And the door did close for months. So here's what I'm asking. Not a conviction, not a mob, not a harassment of a private individual. I'm asking for what we give every victim of every homicide in America. A real investigation. On the record, with answers. Release the autopsy report. Release the ballistics report. Confirm publicly that the spouse's alibi for September 9th was independently verified and corroborated. Confirm publicly that the financial networks surrounding TPUSAs were examined. Explain the countdown. Produce the succession documentation where Charlie handed over his organization to Erika. Answer the Fort Huachuca claim on the record. That is not conspiracy theory. That is a checklist. And in 1979, the United States Congress officially concluded that the Kennedy assassination was probably a conspiracy. Not a blogger, not a podcast, the United States Congress. 15 years later, I don't want to wait 15 years. It was clearly not a lone shooter. The questions exist, the sources are documented, and the gaps are real. Demand answers, not because she's guilty, but because in America, when someone is murdered, the investigation is supposed to be thorough enough that we don't have to wonder. Okay? That's it.